Hello and welcome to Harry with Hawthorne. My name's Kate Ray and I'm one of your two hosts. See, I'm doing it again. My other host is Neil down there, I think. We don't know where he is on the screen right now. We've got a lovely guest with us today. We've got Joe Hickey Hall. Now, I know we're going to speed through this at a real rate of knots, Joe, and I'm going to ask you very, very briefly just to kind of give us an overview of how you got started with the whole fairy thing. And I know it's going to be really difficult for you to do that.
Well, gosh. Okay. So most recently, in 2014, I went to study to do a master's in history and joined the Folklore Society, was invited to write a chapter of Simon Young's Magical Folk book with Mark Norman, who I met at the Folklore Society. And so this kind of section of my life, that's sort of where it started. You know, there's some past stuff and how I might have been interested in the area of it. I've had my own experiences. So, but I never intended to be doing what I'm doing now, put it that way. Then after the book, I set up, or actually just while we were researching for the book, I set up a group, Modern Fairy Sightings, because I wanted to create a project where people could talk about their fairy experiences. And from there, the Modern Fairy Sightings podcast started in lockdown. So just at the beginning of lockdown, I felt really inspired to do it. And so that's what I've been doing ever since, really. So yeah, the project itself now is, having sort of put a lot of my energy into the podcast, I'm now trying to balance that back now with the research so that I have enough space and time to get back to the sort of nuts and bolts, but also to still provide that space within the podcast for people to come and talk about their own experiences and how that felt for them.
Well, why is that aspect, the personal experience aspect, why is that important to you? I know it's very important to me. I find that most intriguing, I think, about the whole high strangeness and weirdness of the world. It's the personal experience, not so much the data gathering, hard data. Why is it for you that's the inspiring part?
I think it always doesn't it? It doesn't have to be about fairies, but when you hear someone talk their truth, it really rings, you know, it hits you at a certain point. You resonate with it deeply. And, you know, even more so if that's something that you might have experienced yourself. So I think that the personal experience, it's a multiple layer thing, really, because, you know, it's providing a space for someone to be really honest about what they've experienced and feel safe to do that, because, you know, on the subject of fairies, you're more than likely just going to be laughed at or just, you know, politely ignored. So there's that. And then there's also, well, who needs to hear that? Not only, you know, you get some people that need to express it, but then, you know, there's that other bunch of people who really needed to hear that experience because they might have had something similar happen to them before, and maybe they did tell somebody and they weren't believed, or maybe they've just never told anyone because they just, you know, looking around them in the world, they just think, well, that doesn't really fit with what we're told, therefore I'm just going to keep stum about it. So yeah, and for me, as I say, I, you know, had you know, a few experiences of my own, so it makes it meaningful. And I think that's why I was inspired to do the podcast. It just felt full of meaning for, you know, to do that.
So before you get on to talking about the podcast, which has been going for a few years now, hasn't it? And it's brilliant, but we'll talk about that in a moment, maybe. Do you want to just flesh out a little bit the Modern Fairy Sightings Facebook page, which is how I came to meet you, however many years ago that was, and how it's become a great resource for many people. It's, you know, it's a very big membership now, isn't it? But also how it's become, as you just touched on, well, I don't want to say safe space. That's terrible. That's a terrible thing to say, is it? You're a safe space. It is a safe page for what, as you've just said, can be a very difficult subject for people who have had the experiences to tell other people about. Can you just sort of tell us a little bit more about the Facebook page first?
Yeah, I mean, there are quite a few out there, quite a few really good pages for sharing your accounts. So mine certainly isn't the only one. And I think I will actually be creating one for the podcast itself, which will function in the same way, but allow people just to sort of, you know, talk to each other within it and give their views and things like that. But the page itself came out of the initial research for the chapter. We had the chapter on Devon, Mark and I, for Simon's Magical Folk, and we'd gone off through Dartmoor, and we thought it would be interesting to hear if people were still having these experiences. And so I wanted to create somewhere where people could tell us about those. And so it started really small, but it kind of gathered momentum fairly quickly. And first of all, it was interesting, you know, before people really started to share them, to share some of the older accounts, which were fascinating. And then, okay, you had a sprinkling that you might find in newspapers, particularly, of course, the Irish press, and you still do get some very interesting articles on modern accounts. But yeah, it has grown. And I'll be honest, I mean, I you know, it's a private group, and it's not one which, you know, it has actually been purposefully kept quite small, because I know it could get massive, and from people that just might want to sort of go in and kind of have a look around, but it's not quite that. It's actually needs to be tended carefully, and is something that I care very much about. We have had a few Egypts in there over the years, and they've been booted out.
How dare you talk about me like
that? I'm sure it wasn't you, Neil. I'm sure
you behave yourself
you.
most of the time, Neil. If you yeah, so it's you know, it has to be watched carefully, I suppose. But I mean, generally, it's just a bunch of really lovely, you know, lovely people that are thankful for somewhere just for us to be able to chat to each other. But like I said, there's loads of other really great groups as well. I think there's yours, the Faery Code, there's Fairy Whispers and Real Fairies, and Fairies Are Real. So there's lots of really good groups out there, as well as modern fairy sightings.
Yeah, no, that's interesting, isn't it? Is we're always saying that it's difficult to pin it down exactly, but probably about the last 10 years or so, there's been a more acceptance of fairies in all their aspects into, for want of a better term, the paranormal community. Whereas
Definitely.
previous to that, fairies was just too out there. Whereas someone could talk reasonably and in kind of a mainstream way about UFOs or ghosts or cryptids, but fairies, no, that's a no-go. And I think partly because of social media, obviously the internet has allowed people to explain and render their own experiences, and it's become quite obvious that there are lots of them. Do you think that's
yeah, definitely. I think you know, you can't stop the tide with things. You can't stop the natural tides and the natural flow of things. And it just seems that, yes, with the age of the internet, there has come this opportunity to exchange amongst ourselves. And I don't think it's just that either. I think it's coming to the fore because it's important. And you know, people seem to be having more experiences as well. I would, you know, I'm going to put my hat in the ring and say that it feels like that. And I think it's because we are perhaps opening to nature again in a way that we hadn't for, you know, we just kind of took nature for granted. and there have been some severe wake up calls for humanity. And I think that we are turning back to connecting with the land again, in various, a myriad of ways. Just, look at all the foraging courses and workshops out there, even before lockdown. Look at all the, you have, shamanistic practices and workshops and things like that. And even if people do yoga, they like to do it outside. There's a reconnection with the land, and of course growing your own, all of that. So I think that we have reconnected with the land, and possibly from that, or maybe there's something that is underlying both of those two things that we see and happen, both the sightings and the reconnection. Maybe that is driven by something else that we don't quite understand yet, or maybe one has driven the other. I don't know. But certainly we are opening to these ideas and reconnecting with the land. Yeah.
So many of you on the Modern Fairy Sightings podcast. This is, it's one of the best podcasts around on the subject, in my humble opinion.
Oh, great! Thank you.
Not as good as this one, obviously, but it's
careful, Neil.
And so how did you move from just having that sort of not static, but the Facebook page and what that does? How and why did you decide to then go on to, I need to make a series of podcasts?
Honestly, I didn't. And I know this sounds bloody ridiculous and just so airy-fairy, as you might say, but honestly, this is how it happened. It was lockdown. I was working from home a lot, as everybody, lots of people were. And it meant that I could go outside and meditate at lunchtime, which is something that I couldn't do. And it's not like I was meditating all the time before either, but obviously at that time we were all going through quite a lot of trauma, weren't we? And there was something going around at the time where you were going to meditate every day, and I went into that practice. I have meditated for a long time, but not every day like this. So I was doing it every day just to maintain, mental and emotional health with the world going completely bananas. And it just came, very, very strong idea came through to do a podcast, and it kept coming through. And I was thinking, after coming out of the meditation, I'd be thinking, well, I don't know how to do that. How am I going to do that? I don't know anything about how to set up a podcast and then I just thought, well, I've got to do something because it's not going away. So I started looking at it, and next minute, I was just having a go. And it took, I think that was in the April, I started the project, and I put the first one out. I was aiming for October. I was aiming for Samhain, when, otherwise known as Halloween, when the veil is thin. But I actually made it out in November, and it had a really lovely welcome response from people, and I was quite taken aback, really, but it felt right, and it still does feel right. And one thing I will say is that throughout this whole project, and particularly with the podcast, I always check back in through meditation to make sure that what I'm doing is okay. I don't want to overstep the mark in any way. Now, that's with the people that I'm interviewing, first and foremost, really important, but also, the Fae themselves. I'm going to say I've got a direct line to them or anything like that. But what I do is I just check in and meditate, and I put it out there and say, is this right? And I do listen to that. So if at any, and I've always said this, if at any point I'm getting the message that, or the sense, you get a vibe from everything, from no matter who you work with, whether it's Fae or whoever you're working with, human beings, you get a vibe if something's right or not. And if it wasn't right, then I would stop it. But at the moment, it's been, basically, it's kind of had its own momentum. And so that's why just recently it was really interesting. It sort of changed gear a little bit. So I I slowed down to see, well, what now then? Because it was kind of slowing up a little bit. And there were some themes coming up which it feels like need to be researched a bit more deeply. So I'm looking at this year, I'm looking at things like childhood themes that have been coming up a lot for people, as in having seen Fae in their childhood. And what that meant, and other things that it tied into too, because sometimes they were related to, UFO experiences, or, strange lights, all sorts of strange phenomena. So there's that, and there are particular sort of fairy types that I'm also interested in as well. So yeah, I think this year, as I said, the podcast is now going out every month to allow me to do a lot more interviewing with experiences and get some writing done. And the plan is that, writing a book. But the interviewing itself at the moment is my main kind of my work time, really, when I'm not in my day job and sorting out family.
And everything else on top of it.
And everything else.
do you find with the people who have experiences that it's something, this is a theme, a common theme that I've picked up on, that people have, and these can be like literally split-second experiences. They don't have to be prolonged over minutes or days or weeks or hours, or that they are incredibly life-changing for people. They are experiences that people want to talk about because of the after effects that they experience from it.
Yeah, very much so. There's always something that happens. And not all of the experiences are nice experiences. Some of them are really terrifying for people as well. But you're right, they are massively pivotal. And we don't know why that is, but it sort of feels like we're connecting into a deeper sense of the universe in some way, which of course we don't yet understand. But once you do that, it changes you, and life is never the same again, really. Because once you have had an experience, you can't really pretend you don't know. Or if you do, then I wonder what happens, because there have been a few stories where people have experienced with someone, and then the other person has just gone, no, they've actually kind of rejigged their brain around it and come up with a different reasoning, and they cannot look at it. They just cannot look at it. And I wonder what it is for people, what life is like afterwards for people when that happens. But for the people that are happy to talk to me about it, for them that have accepted it, then they feel, if it's a good experience, they feel that it's a massive blessing and a real eye-opener, and they see the world through different eyes. So,
I think from my background, sort of first and foremost, a paranormal investigator, I come across people who will have incredibly malevolent experiences of the Fae, and even those in themselves have powerful messages, because they're often related, the things that can be related back to maybe disrespecting the land or not listening to a part of our own development. So even those negative situations have got this positivity to them. There is some rhyme and reason and some lesson that can be learnt in these instances. I love listening to people's personal experiences. I think it's, for me, like I say, it's one of my joys. That the academic side of it interests and intrigues me, but like you, it's that don't you, when somebody has a truth about it, when it's not just an attention-seeking thing. And particularly with the fairies, people don't lie because it's such a taboo subject still. I think people see it very feminine and very childlike, and they don't want to be seen in that bubble of, you've seen a fairy, because even the word fairy to a lot of people doesn't mean what it means. I'm intrigued. I think we must have enough time. I'm intrigued, just briefly, what about your experiences? Could you tell us just a brief experience that you've had with a fae?
Yeah, so the most standout and vivid one, and probably the first one, was I was with my husband, and we were having a really romantic picnic together, and we'd gone to watch the sun go down, and we'd been together about 6 months, I think, maybe slightly longer or less. And something made me look behind us, kind of thing. I was sort of looking that way, and there was this little man who was just a little green man. He was about sort of 2.5, 3 foot high, and he was just looking right at me, and he was looking right into my eyes. And he was not that far away. There was a fallen log, and I can never remember whether he was behind it or in front of it, but the log stands out in my memory because I wondered afterwards whether the log had something to do with him. And he was all greens. He had a hat. I can never remember what the hat looked like, but I know he had a hat. And he was just looking right into my eyes, and his face was so wrinkled. It was wrinkle upon wrinkle. Just you couldn't see flat skin. It was just wrinkles. But he had a lovely face. It was really round, and it was looking at me, and it was a kind of curious little face. And he was just as curious about me as I was about him. And I was kind of looking at him thinking, I don't even know if I was thinking, but I didn't know what I was looking at.
Mm-hmm.
Like I just was, what's going on? I don't really know what's happening, sort of thing. But we kept eye contact. And then I don't know whether I blinked my eyes or looked away, and then he was gone. But he was there as if, as real as a person. He was right there.
So was that purely visual experience? Was there any
Yes.
audio, no tactility? Or...
No,
Yeah.
not that I remember. It was getting to twilight, but it wasn't by any means dark whatsoever. But it was coming to that time. It was sort of, dusk was starting to fall. And the only other thing I can say about it is that I got the overall sense afterwards was that he wanted me to see him. That was the only thing that came from it. It's not like, I have no reason to say that, but that was the feeling. And so I didn't tell my husband because he's just, I don't know what he would have thought about that. But it just, he's not really into stuff like that. So I didn't say anything. And because we hadn't been together that long as well, it's just, I just thought he'd think I was mad or something. So, but afterwards, when we went to leave, because we stayed for quite a bit longer, by the time we left, it was dark and there were no lights around there whatsoever, but we'd left the car, we had to walk back to the car through some paths. So we got up to walk, and there was some long grass to the side of us, which was about a foot. It was very high grass anyway, by the side of us. And as we walked, something in the long grass was walking at the same pace as him, as he's walking. And so he was like, oh, what is that? And he picked up his pace, and then it picked up its pace, and then he started running, my husband, and it started running. And I was running behind, but I was creased up laughing because I knew what it was, because you couldn't see anything. But I knew, and it was just very mischievous. And so that was my first experience. And I have to say, just very briefly, that took place 1 year after I'd had this healing experience. And I do think that experience opened my eyes. Now, I'd had funny experiences when I was a kid, but nothing then through all, I had quite a few up until maybe the age of about 11, say, something like that. But then, nothing really until that point, which was when I was nearing the end of my 20s, that happened. So I think that opening of the consciousness the year before opened me to that, because after that I did see some other sort of fey beings, if you want to call them that.
Do you think
sorry, Kate, go on.
I was just about to say, quite whimsically, do you think that the fairy realm will come in to check out future husband? and make sure he was good enough?
I think that he was attracted by the connection, the powerful connection between us.
Yeah.
Because, you know, it's that the first throes of love and passion, and that real strong emotion, coupled with the fact that it was dusk. And I think that played a part, because obviously it's a liminal, you know, liminal time. Where we were as well, we were near a dolmen. So yeah, so there was that too. So it's probably quite a sacred space, but I felt that he was attracted by us. Yeah.
That's
But
really
it's a good omen that, yeah, I guess in that, like you say, that's a good omen, isn't it? If you've met someone and see a fairy.
Absolutely. That's really interesting. I know I'll sound like a stuck record going on about altered states of consciousness and how that is always seems to be involved with any kind of fairy experience at whatever grade or level of altering your state of consciousness. But so from your own experience there, I would say that, you know, the twilight, your healing experience, exactly what you're saying about all being loved up, that's altered your state of consciousness enough to allow in some form of non-human intelligent entity. It's much easier to say fairies, isn't it, than non-human intelligent entity, but you know, whatever. So going on to the guests on your podcast,
yes,
I've noticed, but this is probably partly because I'm specifically looking for this when I'm hearing experiences. So many of them, in fact, I'd say to some extent, all of them were in some kind of altered state when they had the experience. Not a dramatic psychedelic altered state of experience, but just enough, something was happening in their life, something unusual, out of the everyday at the moment when, for whatever reason, they experience this entity. Would you say that's correct?
Yeah, I think that in most cases there's something really, you know, fairly obvious going on. And I think in terms of altered states as well, we can say that maybe just having a beautiful sense of connection with a place or even a person can be an altered state, because in our busy lives, we don't always get time for that, or even get time to notice that. So a few of them where, I mean, for instance, there were two sisters sitting in a kitchen. That was, what was that? Tea Time Interrupted on series 1. And they're just having a cuppa, and they've both got their babies. I think one of them had her baby in her arms and the other one had the pram just outside the room, and they were just having a cuppa, and then something materialized. So, you know, you might say, well, what was the altered state? Could have been the cup of tea or cup of coffee. I think they were drinking coffee. But my feeling about that is that, you know, you've got these two sisters that care about each other very much. They're in their parents' kitchen, and feeling a sense of love with, they both had their little babies. You know, it was just a really lovely moment between them, and they were just chatting. So if you were looking for an altered state there, maybe it's that. But yeah, I think for most of them, it's fairly obvious, isn't it, that there is something going on. I mean, whether it's that you're out in nature and just communing with nature, like Call to the Other World, which I think was the second episode of series 1, where she's out and she does the calling, the cattle call. She's practicing the calling, and then the little, you know, the little face comes out, and that's just such a beautiful telling, that one. And then you've got, you know, it's quite interesting because for quite a few of them, you have multiple sightings. So you'll have two people there witnessing the, you know, the fairy being or whatever takes place.
I think that's, sorry to interrupt, though, I think that's an incredibly important point. Something I'm looking at the moment, multiple sightings, because that does kind of take out of the equation the usual reductionist view that it's just an hallucination. because you will not get two people hallucinating exactly the same thing at the same time. It's got to be another explanation. So really interesting.
Yeah, true. This is it. And so I mean, for some people it's been that they've been about to do a ritual, or they've just come out of a ritual. That happens quite a lot. So people that are working with these energies, but even for them, they're doing rituals, they're whether it's a kind of druid type stuff, or maybe more Wicca type stuff, or anything in between, it's still a big shock for them when they see something.
Yeah.
No one's ever expecting to see what they see.
Yeah.
And it kind of doesn't work like that, as I'm sure you've spoken about to people before. You can't make these things happen. It's just something that happens. You might be able to.
I've been wondering about that aspect over the last couple of days about, the evidential base that would be, how would we get an evidence base, a real evidence base of these non-human entities? And there is no documentation really. There's people who say that there are fairy spells that you can do, but nobody is claiming that they've actually had physical encounters or had a physicality about these encounters through those things. So it is how do we actually, how do we pick up the telephone this end, whereas fairies seem to be able to bring themselves into our existence, but the other way around, it seems so difficult. It seems like a real push to be able to do that, doesn't it, for us humans? It is. It's Have you ever come across somebody who has invoked and has had that experience that's not been like, a real shocker, that's exactly what they've been doing?
I mean, I've been in rituals where we have, we've done a ritual and then we've kind of gone into the woods, and you can certainly feel things coming up out of the darkness right up to your face and checking you out. But not manifesting. It happened once but I was the only one that saw it. I saw a little fire elemental run into from where we were standing in a circle. There was a candle in the middle of the circle, and this was in a forest. And this little fire elemental, I'm calling it a fire elemental because of what it did. It looked a bit like, on Snoopy, when you get that what is that little yellow character with
the bird? Yeah,
Woodstock. Right. So it looked like that. So half of its body was its head, and the rest was a tiny little arms and legs. And its head had that like Woodstock, but it looked like it's kind of flame shape. And it went into the circle, and it started sort of licking at the candle flame, and it was really mad. It was like a creature, but not of this world. So that was after a ritual, but no one else saw that. So
and were you calling in fire elementals at that stage?
No,
or but so no. It wasn't a direct call into that element.
Calling to the the gods and the elementals of that place, but not specifically with a view to manifesting something. It was more to sort of connect with the place, not to bring anything in, if you like. I mean, I think with this project, I've never sort of been that's not been a driving force for me to sort of prove to people that there is an existence by saying, look, here's the evidence. I have to say, for me, I don't know whether that would be, a good use of my time, because, I don't know how you would go about doing that, really. It's really tricky. I mean, there are groups trying to do just that, and I'm really interested, and I would, absolutely take part in that. But I think, for my own interest, really. But it's not something that this project has never been about sort of, showing it to people and going, look, see, it's true. It's more just sort of, look, while they're still trying to figure out whether fairies are real or not, let's just kind of get on with, let's talk about what it's like, because we know we've seen them And it would just be really nice to be able to talk about that and share stories. And maybe by doing that, we can kind of form some kind of, not necessarily answers, but some more of a shape of an idea of what might be going on. And just let's throw any ideas in there, any and all ideas. I think it's really important to listen to what people feel it is themselves, because if it's their experience, it's their consciousness, and they will know better than anyone what it is that they saw or what it meant. Sometimes when I'm speaking to them, I might get a realization while they're talking and say, oh, do you know, did you think of this? And sometimes that provokes, you know, a self-realization within them. But, you know, it's really kind of, for me, I'm more interested in listening to what their experience was and then go, oh, well, you might like to speak to this person because they've had something similar. And then, you know, you can connect people together.
This is all really like part of an emerging new folklore, isn't it? Because it's different. You know, you read the folklore that you're so familiar with from the past, which tends to get there tends to be a moral to the story. Sometimes it's overlain with storytelling, whereas this new folklore is much more, well, it's anecdotal and it's a little bit more raw. People won't put a morality over it, or they do sometimes, but they will not usually put a moral tone over their stories. It's all about just trying to hear the stories and understand what they might be trying to say. And I think that will take quite a long time for that to coalesce into something that we can make any kind of interpretation of.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, with the, yeah, I know what you mean. I think that side of the folklore, you know, turning into moralistic tales, if you look back at the very early folklore, the medieval Irish folklore, medieval Irish tales, they're in those stories, they are quite fanciful and everything, but there's a chance for the human being to, you know, transcend into something greater. They're illumined in some way. And I think that actually that is more the essence that maybe got a bit twisted with the later folklore and they became moral tales. Because if you look at people's experiences now, they do have amazing, you know, as we've said, they have these experiences afterwards in their own lives. They do have this opportunity to maybe become more like themselves or tune into what's really true for them. So I think that it's not maybe not a moralistic tale to it, but maybe a kind of transcendence or a chance to evolve in a way that is meaningful for them. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Jo, I'm really sorry. I'm going to have to stop you there. I'm going to get you back, and because we're going to pick up from this theme, because I think that the folklore theme is brilliant. I literally think we've got about 30 seconds. I've lost track of time completely.
Okay.
So
oh, no worries.
I want to thank you so
Lovely to
much.
Speak to you both.
We will have you back,
That's lovely.
definitely, and we'll drop a link to your podcast, etc., down underneath. So thank you very much, and thank you, Neil. And
thank you.
I'll speak to you both soon.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.